Hands on the hood! The barked order ripped through the air, each word heavy with authority and accusation. Marcus froze, the command cutting deeper than any blade. The officer's hand hovered close to his holster, daring him to hesitate. His chest tightened as he leaned forward, palms pressed against the cold metal. The polished Porsche he'd been so proud to drive now burned beneath his skin, not from heat but from shame. He could feel eyes on him, strangers pausing mid-step, phones lifting, recording. "Why am I being stopped?" Marcus asked, his voice low but steady. The officer didn't answer. His silence spoke louder than words. Every second dragged, his posture rigid as though waiting for Marcus to break. Marcus could hear laughter from a distance, someone muttering, "Knew it, didn't belong in that ride." He bit down on the inside of his cheek, forcing himself not to react. Every movement was a risk, every breath a gamble. All he had was stillness, and still, it wasn't enough. The officer stepped closer, eyes narrowed, voice booming once more. "Keep those hands flat. Don't move unless I say so." Marcus's heart raced, but he swallowed the fear, burying it beneath a mask of silence. The Porsche behind him, a symbol of hard-earned pride, had suddenly become the reason he was treated like prey. And the longer the moment stretched, the more it felt like the whole world agreed. The officer circled the car, gaze sharp, suspicion dripping from every glance. "Nice ride," he muttered with disdain. "Bet you don't even know who it belongs to." Marcus clenched his jaw. "It's mine," he said carefully, forcing each word out with restraint. "I worked for it, earned it." The cop smirked, dismissing the truth without consideration. His attention wasn't on Marcus as a person, but on the Porsche, as if the car itself testified against him. To the officer, the sleek black vehicle wasn't a reward for resilience or ambition. It was evidence of a crime that hadn't happened. "Cars like this don't just fall into people's laps," the officer sneered, his tone dripping with presumption. "Especially not yours." The insult sliced deeper than the metal pressing, against Marcus's skin. It wasn't about the car. It was about who society believed deserved to sit behind its wheel. Phones captured every second, but not a single voice rose in his defense. To them, the car was a stage, and Marcus was cast as the thief who dared to play a role he wasn't meant for. The Porsche, once a symbol of progress, now betrayed him with every reflection of disbelief in the crowd's eyes. Whispers swirled like smoke, curling around Marcus until they suffocated. A woman clutched her purse tighter as she passed. A group of teenagers giggled while recording, one of them muttering, "Bet he's on probation already." He could feel every stare, heavy and unrelenting. It wasn't curiosity, it was judgment. His dignity, stripped layer by layer, played out for an audience that didn't blink. A man leaned against a lamppost, shaking his head as though he'd seen this scene 100 times before. The indifference stung worse than the laughter. Marcus wanted to shout, to remind them he wasn't a headline waiting to happen, but the weight of their eyes made silence the only shield he had left. Still, that silence cut deep, because in their gaze he saw the verdict already written, and the longer they watched, the more the truth of his humanity felt invisible. The officer's voice sliced through the murmurs. "Where'd you steal this, boy?" The word landed with venom, not a question, but a declaration, stripping Marcus of his name, his story, his worth. "I didn't steal anything," Marcus replied, teeth gritted, eyes fixed on the ground. "It's mine," the officer chuckled, a cold sound void of humor. "Sure it is. Guys like you don't just drive away in rides like this. Tell me the truth before I find it myself." His words hit harder than a shove. Each insult dripped with intent, meant to corner Marcus into submission. To the crowd, it was a spectacle. To Marcus, it was an assault that no camera could capture. "Answer me," the officer barked again, leaning in close enough for Marcus to smell the bitterness in his breath. The sting wasn't just in the words. It was in how easily the officer turned language into shackles, reducing Marcus to a caricature. With every syllable, the space for dignity shrank, leaving him fighting to hold on to the last thread of self-respect. And still, the accusations kept coming, relentless as a drumbeat no one else dared to interrupt. Marcus tried to steady his breathing, but his body betrayed him. His palms slickened against the hood, fingers trembling despite his will. A bead of sweat slipped down his temple, tracing a line of truth his silence couldn't hide. He knew every movement could be misread. A flinch mistaken for defiance, a breath mistaken for aggression. His body, no longer his own, had become evidence the officer would twist at will. "Why so nervous?" the cop sneered. "Guilty conscience?" Marcus wanted to scream back, to tell him the fear wasn't guilt, but survival. But even his voice felt dangerous, every word a risk he wasn't sure he could afford. Inside, adrenaline surged, warring with the fragile thread of composure he fought desperately to maintain. His body shook while his spirit fought to stay upright, a silent rebellion in the face of humiliation that seemed endless. Shame wrapped itself around Marcus like chains, whispering that this was all he'd ever be seen as. But beneath it burned fury, hot, undeniable, demanding release. He imagined spinning around, demanding justice, exposing the truth with raw defiance. He pictured the officer shrinking under the weight of his words. But the fantasy crumbled as reality pressed back. One wrong move, and the cost could be his life. He clenched his jaw, fighting the battle within. Tears threatened, but he refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. "Stay still," the officer ordered again, as if sensing the storm building beneath his stillness. Marcus's silence was louder than a shout, his restraint a protest in itself. Inside, fury collided with fear, leaving him standing in the crossfire of emotions too heavy to hold, yet too dangerous to release. The crowd had grown into a silent jury. A whisper floated, sharp and unkind. "He doesn't belong in that car." Another voice, softer, said, "This isn't right." But it vanished into the noise. Phones stayed raised, screens glowing brighter than compassion. Strangers had turned into spectators, weighing his worth as if his life were a trial they'd already judged. Every face told him the same story: disbelief, suspicion, or apathy. Not one hand extended in defense. Their silence was louder than the officer's words, condemning him with every second they chose not to intervene. The flashing lights painted Marcus's skin in red and blue, reflections that blurred his vision, but not his thoughts. A question rose, sharp as glass. Why do they look at me like a criminal just for smiling in a dream I finally touched? The answer never came. Only more whispers, more stares, more weight pressing him into the hood that once felt like triumph. The Porsche hadn't betrayed him. Society had. And in that moment, the sting of being seen as less than human cut deeper than the accusations echoing from the officer's lips. "Ma, you need to rest," Marcus said, dropping his backpack onto the chair that doubled as a dinner table. At just 17, his voice carried a weight too heavy for his age. Their Brooklyn apartment was small, walls thin enough to hear neighbors argue, but it was home. His mother shook her head, kicking off worn shoes. "Rest doesn't pay bills, baby." Marcus glanced around the cramped space, shelves crowded with old textbooks and second-hand furniture. It wasn't luxury, but it was built on sacrifice. He wanted more, not for himself alone, but for her. In that tiny apartment, with ambition larger than the room could contain, Marcus Carter was already chasing a dream that seemed impossible to everyone else. When silence settled, Marcus reached for the battered notebook hidden beneath his bed. Scribbled inside were rhythms, lyrics, and ideas no one else had seen. He tapped the edge of his pencil against the page, drumming out beats only he could hear. In his mind, every line became music, every sketch a performance. Luxury cars flashed across his imagination, not as trophies but as symbols of freedom. To him, they weren't just machines. They were proof that a kid from Brooklyn could break free, that his music could carry him from these tight walls to a stage that belonged to him. The sound of the door closing late at night told Marcus his mother had returned from her second shift. Her uniform smelled of grease and exhaustion, but she still managed a tired smile. "Have you eaten yet?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he lied, sliding his notebook shut. Her sacrifices were written, in the wrinkles forming too soon on her face, in the calloused hands that deserved rest. Watching her, Marcus made silent promises. He wouldn't let her work herself into the ground for nothing. Every rhyme he wrote, every late-night scribbling beats carried her in it. His determination wasn't about fame, it was about honoring the woman who gave everything just to keep his hope alive. The next day, Marcus walked into a corner store, his hoodie pulled up. The clerk's eyes locked on him immediately, following each step as if waiting for him to slip something into his pocket. "You need help?" the man asked, voice sharp, suspicious. Marcus shook his head. "Just looking." He grabbed a soda, dropped money on the counter, and left without another word. It wasn't new. Teachers who expected failure, neighbors whispering, "He'll end up just like the others," and strangers crossing the street when he approached. All of it sliced quietly but deeply. These weren't headlines about racism in America. They were the invisible barriers he carried daily. Yet, instead of breaking him, they lit a fire. Each insult, each doubt became another reason to prove them wrong. That night, Marcus leaned against the window, listening to the city hum below. Doubt tried to creep in, but the pages of his notebook called louder. Music was more than escape. It was survival. He whispered to himself, "One day, they'll hear me." Dreams felt fragile, but they were the only thing that made the struggles bearable. Even when the world questioned his worth, even when poverty pressed in, he held on. Because somewhere beyond Brooklyn's crowded streets, beyond the prejudice and the struggle, Marcus saw a future that belonged to him. And he wasn't about to let go of it. Not now, not ever. "Can I help you with something?" The voice came sharp, cutting through the soft hum of the record store. Marcus froze mid-step, his hand hovering over a stack of vinyl. He shook his head. "Just looking." But the clerk didn't move. He shadowed Marcus down every aisle, his stare heavy, like Marcus had a price tag hanging off his skin. The Brooklyn teen tried to focus on the music, but every step reminded him of the suspicion pressing in. It wasn't the first time. Stores too often made him feel like a suspect instead of a customer. He whispered to himself, "Why's it always me?" From behind, the clerk folded his arms, eyes narrowing with every record Marcus touched. The weight of prejudice wasn't loud. It was silent, steady, and suffocating. At that moment, Marcus realized it wasn't about the music at all. It was about being watched, judged, and cornered for no reason other than how he looked. And yet, he pulled a record from the shelf, determined not to walk away defeated. Marcus laid the record on the counter, sliding crumpled bills across. The clerk scanned him from head to toe, not the music. "Are you sure you can afford this?" The question wasn't said out loud, but it was written in the smirk, in the slow way change clinked back into Marcus's hand. He pocketed the receipt, jaw tight. Paying in full didn't matter. His money bought the record, not respect. "Thanks," Marcus muttered. Though gratitude felt like a lie, the clerk didn't answer. Just gave a nod that dismissed him like he was a problem leaving rather than a customer valued. Walking out, Marcus knew he carried more than vinyl. He carried a reminder. In America, sometimes payment never erases doubt. "Marcus, let's talk. About your future." The guidance counselor leaned back in her chair, tone measured but laced with certainty. He straightened, notebook in hand. "I'm thinking about applying to NYU. They've got a great music program." She cut him off with a small sigh. "I admire your ambition, but we need to be realistic. College like that isn't always the right fit for kids like you." Marcus blinked. "Kids like me? I just mean," she continued, "trade schools offer stability. Plumbing, electrical, work, those are reliable paths. Music, NYU, it's risky." Her smile tried to soften the blow, but Marcus felt it sharpen instead. The words weren't about practicality. They were about limits she already decided for him. He nodded slowly, but inside anger roared. Every lyric in his notebook suddenly felt like proof she was wrong. The counselor's advice wasn't guidance. It was a cage. And walking out of her office, Marcus swore he wouldn't let her lock the door on his dream. By the end of the week, the wounds weren't visible, but they were there. The clerk's stare, the counselor's words, neighbors whispering, "He'll end up like the rest." Each moment was small on its own, but together they weighed heavy, piling up like scars no one else could see. Marcus lay on his bed, notebook open but pen unmoving. Doubt pressed against his chest. How many times could he be reminded he didn't? But long before he started to believe it, he closed his eyes, fists clenched. The anger was fuel, but the exhaustion was real. And yet even in silence, a small voice inside him whispered, "Don't break now." "Yo, Marcus," a familiar voice called across the block. His friend Devin jogged up, keys jingling in his hand. "You gotta see this?" Devin grinned, pointing to the sleek Porsche parked at the curb. "Belongs to my mentor. He's letting me take it around." "You're riding or what?" Marcus stared, wide-eyed. Luxury wasn't supposed to touch his world, yet here it was, gleaming under the city lights. For the first time that week, hope cracked through the weight of prejudice. He slid into the seat, unaware that this moment, the thrill of borrowed freedom, was planting the seed for the storm ahead. "Step out of the vehicle!" The officer's shout cracked like thunder before Marcus could even explain. I'm not the driver," Marcus stammered, but the words were too slow. The door ripped open, rough hands yanking him into the street. His shoulder slammed against the cold metal as the officer shoved him across the hood. "What are you doing?" Marcus gasped, his voice trembling. "This ain't even my—" "Quiet," the officer barked, pressing down harder. "You think you can joyride in this neighborhood without us noticing?" Devin's voice came from behind, desperate. "It's my mentor's car. He let me borrow it. He'll vouch for us." But the officer wasn't listening. To him, Marcus was already guilty. The sirens weren't blaring, yet the moment screamed louder than any alarm. Every second felt like confirmation. In his eyes, Marcus didn't belong behind that wheel, not even in the passenger seat. "Hands where I can see them," the officer ordered again, twisting Marcus's wrist. Pain shot up his arm, but the deeper ache was the humiliation, the automatic suspicion, the rush to judgment before a single question was answered. Marcus struggled to breathe. "Why are you treating me like a criminal? I didn't do anything." The officer leaned in, voice low but sharp enough to cut. "Boys like you never do, right?" The pat-down wasn't a search for weapons. It was a performance, every movement exaggerated for the street to see. The officer's hands pressed hard against Marcus's chest, down his legs, across his pockets. Each push screamed, "You don't belong." Marcus bit his lip, refusing to give the crowd the satisfaction of a flinch. But the officer made sure there was no dignity left untouched. "You hiding something? Drugs? Keys that ain't yours?" His questions weren't real. They were accusations in disguise. "No," Marcus shouted, voice breaking. "I told you, I didn't steal anything," the officer smirked, patting his pockets again like proof was hiding in his skin. "Funny how you all say the same thing. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about law. It was a message broadcasted to everyone watching. Power decides who you are, not truth. And Marcus knew deep down that no explanation could break The script already written against him, the whispers started first. Another one caught in a stolen car. Figures. Look at him. Marcus heard every word, though none were spoken to his face. Phones rose in the air, red recording lights, blinking like eyes, capturing his humiliation in real time. A woman muttered, probably thought he'd stunt for the gram. A man added, bet he don't even got a license. The street had turned into a courtroom, and every stranger played judge. The officer didn't need to say Marcus was guilty. The crowd delivered the sentence themselves. Marcus's chest tightened. He wasn't just fighting a cop anymore. He was fighting the weight of stereotypes, the kind passed down like broken records replayed again and again, and as the eyes burned into him, the silence of those who knew better cut even deeper. Then came the voice that sealed it. He didn't belong in that car. A man across the street leaning against a lamppost spat the words like venom. He didn't shout them, but they carried louder than the officer's commands. Heads nodded in quiet agreement, some lips curling into knowing smirks. The Porsche wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of boundaries Marcus was never meant to cross. In their eyes, the sight of a black teen in luxury could only mean one thing: theft. Not ambition, not mentorship, not success, just crime. Marcus turned toward the voice, fury burning in his chest. Why not? Why can't I? But the question vanished in the air, swallowed by the same silence that always met his defiance. The bystander didn't answer. He didn't need to. The echo lived inside Marcus long after the words left his lips. I said I didn't steal it. Marcus's voice cracked, louder now, fighting to cut through the noise. It was given to us. My friend's mentor let him borrow it. But the words dissolved, lost under chuckles, whispers, and the officers barked orders. Stop resisting. The officer snapped, even though Marcus hadn't moved. I'm not resisting. I'm telling the truth. For a second, his eyes caught a woman holding her phone inches from his face. He could see his reflection in the screen. Scared, angry, desperate. He hated that she would post it, not as proof of injustice, but as entertainment. Sir, please, Marcus begged, turning toward the officer. Just call him. Call the man who owns the car. He'll tell you. The officer pushed him harder against the hood. Enough. Nobody's believing your story. Marcus's chest heaved. The truth was right there, waiting on the other end of a phone call. But the officer had already decided what was real, and Marcus realized his voice was never meant to matter. Here, the officer grabbed his arm again, spinning him toward the sidewalk. On your knees, he ordered. Marcus's legs buckled as he was forced down, palms scraping the rough concrete. The radio crackled with backup requests, but the real message was already loud enough: submission. Laughter trickled from the crowd. A teenager muttered, Guess rap dreams don't stop you from hitting the pavement. Another joked, Bet he'll rhyme about this in jail. Marcus's head lowered, shame wrapping around him tighter than the officer's grip. He wasn't a teenager with ambition anymore. He was a spectacle, a headline in the making, and the glow of phone screens made sure the whole world would see. Him not as Marcus Carter, but as another suspect brought down. His throat burned, eyes heavy with tears begging to escape, but he clenched his jaw, swallowing them whole. He wouldn't cry. Not here, not now, not in front of strangers who'd replay his humiliation for likes and comments. The officer wanted to see him break. The crowd wanted weakness. Marcus gave them neither. Inside, though, he felt the fracture. The sting of knowing dignity was slipping away, and still, even on his knees, he whispered to himself, almost a prayer, They don't get to write my ending. The night wasn't over. The fight had only begun. Stay down, the officer growled, his hand pressing hard on Marcus's shoulder. But then, another sound cut through the tension. Not sirens, not laughter, an engine, deep and smooth, humming with quiet authority. Heads turned as a black SUV glided to a stop, its presence demanding attention without a word. The mocking voices fell silent. Phones paused mid-recording. Even the officer's grip loosened slightly, confusion flickering in his eyes. Marcus lifted his head, breath trembling. Something was shifting. "Who is that?" someone whispered, breaking the hush. Another muttered, "That ride's serious. Whoever's inside ain't playing." The moment hung heavy, the officer's dominance slipping as uncertainty crept in. Marcus felt it too, the sense that the night had just taken a sharp turn, though he couldn't yet see where it would lead. The SUV door opened, and the silence deepened. Out stepped a figure the crowd knew instantly. "Yo, that's Jay-Z," someone gasped, the name spreading like a spark through dry grass. The air shifted. Conversation stopped. Even the officer straightened, his confidence cracking under the weight of recognition. Jay-Z walked with calm precision, every step controlled, deliberate. He didn't need to shout or posture. The authority radiated from him effortlessly. "Marcus," he said firmly, his voice carrying through the night. "You good?" The crowd leaned in, stunned that the boy on his knees knew the man standing before them. Marcus's lips parted, words barely finding him. I don't know," he whispered, half in disbelief. The officer blinked, unsure whether to keep his hold or step back. And in that hesitation, the power that had once felt unshakable began to crumble. Jay-Z didn't waste a second. He glanced at the flashing phones, then at the officer, making sure every lens caught his words. "That Porsche you see?" he said clearly, pointing to the car. "I gave it to him. Personal gift. He earned it through our mentorship program. That young man worked harder than most adults I know." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers turned into stunned silence. Marcus froze, his chest tightening. Jay-Z wasn't just defending him, he was declaring it in front of the world. "You stopped him," Jay-Z continued, locking eyes with the officer, "because you couldn't believe he belonged in that driver's seat. That's called racial profiling. And it stops here, tonight, on every single camera watching." The officer opened his mouth, but no words came. The crowd had already heard the verdict. Marcus, still on his knees, felt the sting of humiliation begin to fade. Not gone, but pushed back by something stronger. Validation. For once, his truth wasn't silenced. It was amplified. The reaction spread like wildfire. "Wait, he really owned that car? Jay-Z himself just said it." "Man, they had this kid on the ground for nothing." Phones rose higher, capturing every angle, every word. What had started as entertainment for strangers had become evidence, proof of injustice unfolding live. Marcus could hear it. The same mouths that mocked him minutes earlier now scrambled to record the truth. The same eyes that judged him now widened with awe. For the first time, the crowd wasn't united against him. They were turning, slowly, imperfectly, but turning toward outrage, toward accountability. And Marcus felt the shift press against his skin like heat rising from fire. The officer's jaw tightened, color draining from his face. This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, but the words were useless. Every camera had already decided what it was. Jay-Z folded his arms, steady, unflinching. The officer's badge, once a shield of dominance, now felt like dead weight against his chest. He knew it. He had profiled the wrong teen, in front of the wrong man, under the gaze of an audience that would not forget. And with each recording, light blinking red, his control slipped further away. Marcus rose slowly, no longer forced down but lifted by the moment. For the first time that night, he wasn't the suspect. He was the center of vindication. The laughter, the whispers, the cruelty, they no longer defined him. Every camera was capturing not his shame, but his justice. Effective immediately, Officer Daniels is placed on suspension pending investigation. The announcement came from the department itself, but by then it hardly mattered. Millions had already watched the viral video. The images of Marcus pinned to the ground, contrasted with Jay-Z's calm defense, were everywhere. News anchors debated it. Activists shared it. Students reposted it. The narrative was clear. Accountability was no longer optional when the world was watching. Marcus scrolled through endless notifications, each ping reminding him that the humiliation he once feared would define him had instead exposed the system. "See," Jay-Z told him quietly, "the truth always fights back." Marcus nodded, realizing the officer's badge no longer protected him from consequences. It had become a symbol of abuse the nation refused to ignore. By the next morning, Marcus's name wasn't just trending, it was headlining. Justice for Marcus flooded every platform, transforming a moment of racial profiling into a nationwide demand for change. Talk shows dissected the footage, journalists dug deeper, and opinion columns called it a turning point in conversations on racism in America. 4. Marcus. It was overwhelming. The whispers of strangers had once branded him guilty. Now, those same voices were chanting his name as a symbol of resistance. Jay-Z didn't let the wave stop at headlines. Standing before cameras again, he declared, "Marcus isn't just a victim. He's an artist, a voice this world needs." He revealed plans to back Marcus's dream, offering studio time, mentorship, and a platform that no humiliation could silence. Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "You'd really do that for me?" Jay-Z smiled. "I already did. That car wasn't a gift. Believing in you was." In that moment, Marcus realized his story wasn't ending in shame. It was opening into a future bigger than he imagined. Looking back, Marcus finally found words for what he had endured. "They saw a thief," he admitted, voice steady, "but he saw my future." That difference changed everything. The crowd of supporters, the flashing headlines, the unexpected mentorship, all of it traced back to that single divide between judgment and belief. What once felt like the lowest point of his life had become the foundation of something greater. And as he stood taller, Marcus knew this wasn't just his victory. It was a message to every young black man told he didn't belong. The world doesn't get the final word. But now the question isn't just about Marcus. It's about you. If you stood in that crowd watching humiliation unfold, would you stay silent or step forward? Think carefully, because silence often speaks louder than words. So I'll ask you directly, what would you have done if you saw this happen? Do you believe true justice was served, or was it simply damage control? Share your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if this story moved you, and subscribe so voices like Marcus's reach more people. Together, these conversations can spark real change.